Hi, this is the first video for the week number 3, and we are still stuck on the first chapter of the presentations. The speed of the lecture online right now is pretty slow. There are several reasons, but I think the main reason is we don't know how to process our lecture on the 100% online system. So that is my fault. So I decided to speed up a little bit, um, just summarize in the video, and most of study will up to you guys. Just study by yourself with the presentation file and this video and the textbook. You have to borrow if you have any part of the lecture you don't understand for 100%, or if you cannot solve some practice problems by yourself, then you should definitely borrow a textbook to study further by yourself. I haven't received any question from you guys so far until now, so I assume that all of you guys have the clear understanding on every pages of the lecture so far. Um, because this is just repetition of your principles of microeconomics part. So I think this is super easy, and we can just skip some easy part for just speeding up the lecture and just going to the next chapter a little bit quicker than expected. Okay? How about you guys' life? My life is just stuck in the house. Sometimes get out to buy something, buy some food, or buy some really, really needed goods or services. And without that activity, I'm usually in my house with my family, keeping my family safe against the coronavirus 19. Um, but I sometimes go to school because I have some administrative roles. So attending some meetings or meeting people to discuss about some things, to decide things. And the part of my decision does not include how and when the school will be opened for the face-to-face lecture. Um, this is pretty, you know, frustrating moment for all of us. Just the only thing we can do is just to wait. So this is really boring sometimes and frustrating and really inefficient in study wide things. So the only thing we can do is just to be more patient, and to be just relaxed by ourselves, and receive any kinds of update from the headquarters of the university. And sometimes studying economics will kill your time really efficiently. If you study hard about some microeconomics, for instance, right now, then you're gonna just spend some hours with these some kinds of shitty things, and you can just kill some time in your house, which will help you to improve your quality of life a little bit. So today I'm gonna record this video for less than 30 minutes to finish our first chapter, the supply and demand part, and the next chapter will be also discussed about some supply and demand curve with some deeper applications such as the elasticity part or some kind of tax instance part or something. Those two and more things are some kinds of base or the fundamentals to start the real microeconomic theory. So I will just try to get a little bit quicker in some part in this chapter and the next chapter to reach the real first chapter of microeconomic theory, which will be the chapter 4, with a little bit quicker. Okay, so the last time we studied about the supply part and the demand part, and we know the market will have a equilibrium if the quantity demanded meets the quantity supply. So we just define the equilibrium in the market, and equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. You can just read the definition, and I think there will be no hard part to understand. But sometimes market does not have an equilibrium, which means that not all the market has an equilibrium. Some part of the market will malfunction, then that type of market doesn't have any equilibrium. So this is called a disequilibrium situation. And generally there are two types of disequilibrium. One situation is quantity supplied is larger than the quantity demanded, so which is called the excess supply, because supply is larger than demand, which means that we don't have any equilibrium at that price level. Sometimes the quantity demanded is larger than the quantity supplied, which is also another type of the disequilibrium. So if quantity demanded and quantity supplied are not equalized, then we're going to have the disequilibrium situation. And disequilibrium is not that bad, which means that, we cannot judge equilibrium is good thing or disequilibrium is bad thing. We just see what happened right now in the market. So this is just kind of the pictorial things, pictorial representations for the equilibrium. Okay, so how do you guys find out the equilibrium? It is easy, right? Supply curve is the upward graph, and demand curve is the downward graph. So if we have a little mass, you will reason that there will be only one intersection point between the supply and the demand curves. And you can just point out that point by yourself, which is at the price level of the $2, and the quantity supply and demand equalize at 80 units, right? So it is easy to find out the equilibrium. And we can also exemplify two different types of disequilibrium. The first case is at the price level of the $2.40, which is a little bit higher than the equilibrium price level. And at that price level, the quantity supply is rather than the quantity demanded, which means that excess supply is 22 units. So at the price level of the $2.40, this market does not have equilibrium. Okay. Or another case is that the excess demand, right? So, and you can easily define by yourself. This is just opposite situation of the disequilibrium. I will not explain the excess demand, for instance, because you can do that by yourself. So, I know some guys struggle in simple calculation, but the way to improve for your mathematics, the best way to improve your mathematics is just practice and practice again. So let us practice. So we have two different types of curves: demand curves or demand function, which is defined by QD, and the supply function, which is defined by QS. QD means quantity demanded, and the QS means the quantity supplied. And the quantity demanded will be affected by two factors: a constant number, 160, and the price, P, which is unknown variable, and the coefficient of -40. And quantity supply will be also affected by two factors: the constant and the price level of that good. So let us find out the equilibrium, okay? And to find out the equilibrium, you can easily apply the definition of the equilibrium. The definition of equilibrium is a situation where quantity demanded equals to the quantity supply, which means that there is only one quantity we can define, which is the Q star. Q star means the quantity supply and the quantity demanded at a specific price level where quantity demanded equals to quantity supply. And we assume that there will be only one unique point because demand curve is downward and supply curve is upward, right? We are talking about equation number 8. So by defining Q star, then we can remove one number of unknown variable, because simple mathematics. If you solve for the two unknown variable, then you need at least two equations, and exactly the two equations. But if you don't define the Q star, then you're gonna have the three unknown variables, the QD, the QS, and the P. But you have only two equations, so you cannot solve for QD or QS or P. But by applying our economic knowledge, then we can reduce a number of unknown variables by two, the Q star and the P. And you have two equations. So you can solve for the Q star and the P, or now it is defined by the P star, because the equilibrium price is simply defined by the price level where equilibrium quantity exists, right? So we can now talking about number 9. You can just equalize demand function and the supply function and remove the Q part. So only remain the part is the P part, the price part. So only one equation with one unknown variable. So you can easily solve for it because this is one-dimensional equation. You don't have to apply for factoring, I don't know, 인수분해 kind of things. You can just, plus, negative, multiplying, or dividing. That's it, right? So you can do that by yourself, equation 10, or you can finally get the value of the P star. In the real exam, I need you to find out the P star or Q star with the exact value of numbers, like 2 in this case, or like 80 in the Q star case, okay? But if you cannot do that in the real exam, then you can just write down what you are thinking about and what you are doing for solving for the question. Then I will read all of them and I will evaluate your writing to find the answer. Then I will give you the partial point of that. Okay, so don't be too frustrated if you cannot solve for unknown variable with exact number. Don't panic. Okay, so you can just do by yourself for your best. Then I will read everything in the exam. But the problem is that I'm not sure we can do the exam things at this situation. So I'm thinking about some alternatives for the midterm exam at least. I hope we can meet before the final exam, but I'm pretty sure that we cannot meet until the midterm exam. So I think the midterm exam should be, alternated by the other form of things like the homework things or some report things. But this type of course, the microeconomic course, it is really hard to be alternated by the report or homework. This is English course first, and this is some mathematics things. It's really hard to do some homework things. So I'm just thinking about, and I will let you know whenever I find out the solution for it. Anyway, now we turn to the change in equilibrium. The equilibrium is not the fixed number. It can be changed only if there is any change in supply or the demand. And supply and demand curve can shift it to the right side or left side with some factors, some environment changes or some prices so substitute or complement changes. Then then the function will be shifted. Then equilibrium will be also changed. So in this situation, the demand curve is shifted to the right. Why? You can find out the reason. So this is the market for avocado. We are still talking about the avocado, my favorite food. If you have any chance to try avocado, you should do that because avocado is really good food. Anyway, the avocado and the tomato is, in this case, those two vegetables are substitute each other, which means that they are competing each other. So the environment is changed. Price of tomato increases by 55 cents, which means that the tomato is pricey right now. So the demand for tomato will be decreased, which means demand for avocado will be increased, right? So demand curve shift to the right side, which means that increasing demand for avocado. So our equilibrium point will be moved from E1 to E2 easily. So how about the price level? Since the demand curve is increased, price level will be also increased logically and intuitively. But at the same price level, so the old equilibrium price level, the $2 at this case, what happened? It is excess demand at the $2 right now. So the $2 is not equilibrium price anymore with the change in demand curve. With the change in demand curve, $2.20 are the new price level of the equilibrium. And how about the equilibrium quantity? At E1, the equilibrium quantity was 80, but since the demand curve will shift to the right side, the new equilibrium point E2, the quantity of the equilibrium is 83. Okay, so equilibrium is changed. Another practice problems. Okay, so we are more deeply digging in the complement and substitute. The complement means like the pencil and the remover. We need both together to write down something or to remove something. So to complete our document, we need pencil and we also need remover. Substitute means Samsung Galaxy and the iPhone. Those two are substitute for most of people. I have only one cell phone. I do not have the two cell phone because I'm a poor person, and I assume most of you guys have the same situation. So if you choose only one cell phone, then you're gonna just decide between the Samsung Galaxy S or the iPhone. So they are competing each other, which means that they are substitute. Okay, so now we're gonna do some simple algebra. So now we are putting the price of tomato from the previous demand and supply curve for the avocado market. So the situation is that the price of tomato is now increased from 80 cents per unit to the $1.35. Huge inflation in the potato market. So this is the change of the avocado's substitute. Okay, so now we assume there will be some effect on the avocado market. The tomato market is not appeared in this problem, but we know that the avocado and the tomatoes are the substitute each other. So the avocado market will be affected by the tomato price changes. So this is the simple math. So we start with the original this is demand supply function. The Q equals to so I think this is the demand curve for the avocado. The quantity demanded will be affected by some constant 144, and the price of avocado P, and the price of tomato the PT. Okay, so we have the three factors that can affect on the quantity demanded of the avocado. So now we putting in the original tomato price 80 cents, then we can get the one demand curve, and we put in the new price of tomato 135, then we're gonna have the new demand curve for the avocado. Okay, we are talking about the number 2 and number 3. Then we can find out the difference between those two things. Okay, how big difference between number 2 equation and number 3 equation? There is 11. shift from the constant numbers. The same slope, number 40, does not change, okay? And the price of avocado is unknown variable, so it can vary from the 0 to the infinity. So P is not our consideration at this point. So the difference between number 2 demand curve and the number 3 demand curve is only the constant term, 160 and 171. How much? By 11. So that 11 is the difference between those two demand curves. Okay, and supply curve does not change because supply curve is not affected by the price change of tomato. So the new demand curve, 171 negative 40 plus price of avocado, and the same supply curve equalize those two things to remove the Q part, then you're gonna get the real value of the P star. And putting P star on any of supply and demand curve, then you're gonna get the Q star. Easy, right? Very, very easy. And I assume that all of you guys can do that. And definitely, if we have any exam, then definitely you have the similar type of question in your real exam. So do your own practice, and it will help you a lot. So price changes in equilibrium, we have two equilibrium points, right? The original equilibrium and the new equilibrium. The original equilibrium price was 2, and the new equilibrium price level is the $2.20. So the difference is 20 cents. And the change in quantity equilibrium is the 3. Yeah, this is another example. And now you can do by yourself for the practice. So this is change in supply curve in this case. So you can do, so the first step is to find out the changes in environment in the market. So you should decide that factor could possibly affect on the demand side or supply side. You decide that, okay? So that's the first step. So after deciding the effect of the change of the environment, then you decide the direction of any of demand or supply curve. You decide, okay, so this type of changes can negatively affect on demand side or positively affect on the supply side. You can decide the direction and the part, demand or supply part. The remaining thing is the simple calculation. Okay, so the only more practice will get you the better grade. I think it is true for at least in economics part. When I was the student, then I was advised by the older generation of students. They advised me.
네. 어느 연락처 말씀이신가요?
Siri, iPhone 3. Stupid girl. Anyway, so if you put the more time on studying, then until some specific level of understanding, you're gonna get definitely the better outcome out of the more time putting in there. So that's true in economics. So practice yourself with the more practice problems. I can provide you if you want. So I will unroll some practice problems after finishing each chapter. Then I will give you maybe 10 practice problems or something. Then you can do by yourself, right? I'm not sure I can give you the answer or not. Giving answer is kind of, I think, is kind of the high school things. In college level, then you're gonna find out the answer by yourself. But sometimes it seems irresponsible by the professor. So yeah, I'm thinking about it. Right. So the last part of this chapter is the government intervention. We know we have the third economic agent in the market, not supply part, not demand part, which is called the government. The government agent does not exist in the market always, which means that the government can only intervene in the market when the market fails. The market failure is really important concept, so you should definitely understand yourself. you have to be sure you understand what the market failure is. Okay, so just searching for Google or something. And sometimes government intervenes when their um, intended market failure is more efficient for our society, which is a little bit complicated to understand. But sometimes government decides, okay, so we're gonna make some disequilibrium in the market because we know that disequilibrium can help more people. What kind of example do you think about that kinds of intended disequilibrium? Minimum wage, the best example for it. Without minimum wage, then the equilibrium wage level may be too low for many people, so they are starving, and the government does not want to see that, so they set up a little bit higher wage level than the market equilibrium price, market equilibrium wage. So that is the good example of the intended disequilibrium by the government. So government can intervene in the market by many polished tools. They can use the licensing, they can use the law, or they can use any other things. So the result of government intervention will be either price ceiling or the price flooring. I think this is also the principles of microeconomic level. So I'm pretty sure that all of you guys know about that. So this is kind of internet trade example, which will be pretty helpful for us. So we have two different supply curve. If the government does not intervene in this trade market, then there will be more supply, which is represented by the S with parentheses no ban. But if a government intervenes in the market, if they make some quota things or they make any regulation to block some import, then the supply of imported good will be reduced or will be just zero. So the supply of that good will be decreased. So we're gonna see that kind of supply curve with S bar with parentheses of the band. Okay, so we have two different equilibrium, E1 and E2. E2 is the equilibrium when the government intervenes. E1 is equilibrium when the government does not exist even. The practice problem. What are the practice problems? Wow, we have so many practice problems. Okay, so this is the situation where the United States quota on the sugar import. Okay, so if the United States government sets up some specific number of amount of imported sugar at the Q bar, then what happens to the United States, the sugar market? Which means that American importing firm can import any of foreign sugar until the total amount of sugar reaches to the Q bar. So they cannot exceed the imported sugar over the Q bar. So we have a little bit of a kinked supply curve. Okay, so until the Q bar, then they can freely import the sugar. But after the Q bar, then there is no more import. There is only the domestic supply. Okay, so the overall supply curve of the sugar in the United States will be the sum of the domestic sugar and the imported sugar. And before the quota level of the quantity of sugar, then the supply of the sugar in the United States will be still sum of domestic and the imported sugar. But after the Q star, the quota level, the supply of the sugar in the United States will be exactly the same with just only domestic sugar produced in the United States, not included in the imported sugar. So we have two different kinked version of the supply curve. The last example is the minimum wage. Minimum wage is really a kind of controversial issue in many countries, including us, the South Korea. I was wondering if you agree with the higher level of minimum wage or not. This is really argument things, which means that you can make your own argument. There is no right answer or wrong answer. Minimum wage can give employee a little bit more wage so they can get the better income. But many economists argue that the higher level of minimum wage can make the more unemployment. You can see what happens in the graph. Without minimum wage, the equilibrium price or equilibrium wage will be W star. And equilibrium quantity of labor, which means that the number of people employed is L star if there is no government. But the government believes that the W star is too low for the employed. So they set up the minimum wage at the W bar, which is pretty higher than W star. So the employer cannot give their employee less than W bar, which is not equilibrium wage level, too high for the employer. So the employer decided that, okay, so we have to pay a little bit higher wage, then we're gonna just cut our employee, the number of wage. So they will reduce their employee number from L star to LD. But at the higher level of wage, then in the job market, there will be more applicants for that job because they believe if they can get hired, they can pay more than the equilibrium wage level. So there will be more supply of labor from L star to LS. So LS minus LD is some kinds of people they really want to be hired, but they cannot find out the job. So this is kind of excess supply, and this excess supply is called unemployment because they are still seeking for a job at the minimum wage level, but they cannot find out job because there is not many employer at that price level. Okay, so the higher employee will be reduced from L star to LD, so there will be more unemployment. But if you get hired, then you're gonna get paid higher from W star to the W bar. So if you get hired, you're gonna get the better life, but it is harder to get a job. So this is the result of the minimum wage. Very easy and simple analysis, but it is really insightful. So I think it's better for you guys to understand this part. Pretty good for your, point of view when you're thinking about the social issue like minimum wage. Then you can use these kinds of simple tool to argue with your friends. Then you can get the better reason to win the debate. Okay, so this is the end of our first chapter. Then we're gonna jump to the second chapter in the next video. Right, see you guys later.